Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day, wherever you're at, whenever you're watching this. We're going to be jumping into the next episode of the Magnus Archives here. This is going to be Magnus Archives episode 10, Vampire Killer. I wonder if we're going to get into some, we're going to have Blade here. We're going to have some Constantine going on here in the Magnus Archives. It sounds like we might be getting into a bit more of supernatural compared to some of the other ones. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. But yeah, links will be down below in the description, as always, to the Magnus Archives playlist, the Rusty Quill Podcast YouTube channel, and to their website. So please do me a favor, go check out all their stuff. Check out if they got any sponsorship stuff going on. Check out their Patreon. Check out their YouTube membership benefits. So far, I've been greatly enjoying this series, and they definitely deserve the love. So go over there, give them a like, subscribe to their channel, check out anything they got going on, show them some love. If you'd like to join us when I do these reactions live as I am right now with my YouTube members, I'd love to have you guys come in and hang out and join us as we have our discussions before, during, and after. There's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description. So if you'd like to take your support to the next level, you can check all that stuff out. But regardless, thank you guys for coming in, hanging out, watching the video. I greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to do so. Hope you enjoy the video. If you do, consider leaving a like and a sub, as it helps me and the channel grow. So, all the plugs done, everything's said. Let's jump into this. Magnus Archives, episode 10, Vampire Killer.
Rusty Quill presents the Magnus Archives. Episode 10, Vampire Killer.
So will there indeed be a vampire, and will it indeed get killed in this? That is, I guess, going to be the question. The intro music always hits hard.
Statement of Trevor Herbert regarding his life as a self-proclaimed vampire hunter.
Oh, okay.
Original statement given July 10th, 2010. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the Magnus Institute, London.
Wonder if he's going to claim that he's seen and killed Dracula.
Statement begins. Right then. Been almost 50 years I've been meaning to pay you people a visit and get this down on paper, but
what do you mean, you people?
Here. So where to start? My name is Trevor Herbert, like I put at the top of your form there, and I've been homeless for most of my life. In fact, if you lived in Manchester, there's a good chance you'd have heard of me. They call me Trevor the Tramp. I mean, I'm not exactly easy to miss, am I? And I've been living there in public view for so long, I guess I've become kind of an institution. Helps that I've always had a kind of uncanny knack for guessing people's ages. People will come up to me on the street and ask me to guess their age, and I'll tell them, and most of the time they'll be shocked when I get it right. It's fun. So everyone around Manchester knows about Trevor the Tramp, sure. I hear someone even made me a page on the internet, and it got a few thousand likes. I don't know exactly what that means, but it sounds nice. Obviously that's not why I'm here, though, is it? No, I'm here because I've also dedicated my life to finding and killing.
Go head up his GoFundMe. They got a GoFundMe for Trevor the Tramp out there somewhere, I'm sure. Hit the man up.
Vampires. I've killed 5 people that I know for sure as vampires, and there are 2 more that may or may not have been. There is 1 man I have killed, unfortunately, who I'm now sure was human, but
Rip.
I also know that he was a violent criminal, so I try not to feel too badly about that.
Okay.
I'm sure it's hard to accept for anyone, even an organization such as yourselves, but I do not have proof to give you except for the vampire teeth that I will leave with this statement. Do not feel bad about reporting me to the police for the murders, as I am sure you must, since I have recently received a diagnosis of late-stage lung cancer, and it is doubtful I will be living much longer anyway. That is the main reason for finally putting down on paper the details of the mission I've been secretly undertaking for the last half a century.
This one's interesting already just because it's basically kind of like, how do I put this? It's almost kind of like a first person telling, I don't know, but this seems like every other video so far has been like the victim's perspective. This one seems like, he's the vampire killer, he's the hunter. So we're going to see from like quote unquote the good guy's perspective, I guess, if he is indeed actually true and he is hunting down vampires, or he could just be crazy and killing people. You know what I'm saying? So I don't know, but this one already has kind of a different vibe to it than previous ones.
I killed my first vampire in 1959. At that point, I was still living a mostly normal life, save perhaps for the abuse my family was subject to from my father. He was a vile man who ended up killing my mother in 56. It was a clear-cut case of drunken murder, but the courts ruled it as an accident, and my father stayed out of jail. Luckily, myself and my brother only had to endure 4 months of unpleasantness from him before he finally finished drinking himself to death. I was 13 when he finally died, and my brother was 15. Following his death, there were several attempts to rehome us as orphans, but they always split us up, and we couldn't be doing with that, so we'd generally run away. After a while, it became so we were happier finding our way on the streets than in another stranger's home. It was in autumn of 1959 that we were taken in by Sylvia MacDonald. It wasn't any sort of official fostering agreement, but it was getting to be quite cold at the end of October, and it just saw us shivering in a side street next to the King's Arms Hotel as it was back then, on Tipping Street before the Ring Road took it over. Looking back, I believe it to have been visiting the pub for the purposes of locating down and outs for use as victims, and in my brother and myself, I must say, it successfully found some. It looked like an older woman, a widow, I assumed from the way it dressed in black, and had a strange manner, which I know now to be the mark of the vampire, but back then I paid no attention to it. Many of the older folks had lived through both wars, and it was not uncommon for them to be somewhat strange. I thought this was the case with Sylvia MacDonald, and after a small amount of discussion, my brother and I agreed to the offer of food and shelter. Let me say a little bit about the vampire's manner, because once I taught myself to read, I read as much on the subject as I could, and it isn't covered often or clearly in those books I have found. You see, from my own observations, I believe a vampire to be more like an animal than a man. That is not to be taken as merely a turn of phrase, but more to do with how they work. I do not believe vampires are human in anything more than their appearance, nor have I ever seen evidence that they create more of their kind through feeding. One thing that should be noted is that they do not speak. In fact, they are, in my experience, totally silent, having no need for air and no room in their throats for a windpipe.
Interesting.
They are able to make themselves understood, however, with absolute clarity, though the manner through which they do so has never been clear to me. When Sylvia MacDonald came to us in the alleyway that day, we understood that was the name it gave itself, and that we were being offered a meal and a bed, even though it never uttered a single sound. More than that, I do not recall the fact that it never said a word as striking either of us as strange in the slightest.
Yeah, that would be
I've
weird.
never fully understood how they are able to do this, and I doubt that I ever shall, but I can only assume it to be some instinctive form of hypnosis or mind control. Another misconception I have always faced when trying to discuss vampires is that people think they cannot go out during the day. They can. While I have witnessed them avoid direct sunlight if possible and wear generally more covering clothes when moving around during the daytime, they seem to have no significant problem doing so. I would describe them as weaker during the day, but whether this is scientifically due to the sunlight or simply because evil has less power in the daylight hours is unclear to me. Sylvia MacDonald came to us on an overcast afternoon, and enough of its pale flesh was uncovered that, were sunlight to truly harm a vampire, then it would likely have been destroyed. On that afternoon, my brother Nigel and I agreed to go back to the house of Sylvia MacDonald in the hopes of a roof over our heads for a little while. It lived on Loom Street, which is still there, though the house itself was torn down long ago, and there's just a bit of scrubland now where it used to be. I sometimes go there to pay my respects, since my brother has no burial or grave I can visit. The house was old, even when I went there in 1959, and entering it, I was hit by a stale, coppery smell that I did not recognize as old blood at the time. since I was barely 16 and did not have then the experience I have now. The furniture and wallpaper had clearly not been changed in many decades, and a thick layer of dust covered everything. Even the floor was pale with dust, except for a stark line where Sylvia MacDonald moved, the train of its dress dragging behind it. I remember wondering whether Sylvia MacDonald walked exactly the same route through the house always, as I saw other clear lines of passage in the rooms we passed through. None of the furniture looked used, and when I picked up a book from one of the shelves, the pages were solid with damp and mould. I began to feel very uneasy at this point, but whatever powers of persuasion the vampire had calmed me enough to continue following it with my brother.
Interesting.
We went up the stairs, and I was led to a small room with a bed in it. I was made to understand that this would be my room and was left there as Sylvia MacDonald led my brother away to the room next to it. When it returned, it brought a bowl of fruit and offered it to me. The fruit was clearly weeks old and in various stages of rotting, but just to appease the thing, I found an apple and a couple of grapes that seemed edible, and I ate them. It watched me silently the whole time, and then turned and walked out towards Nigel's room.
That's creepy as hell.
By this time, whatever the creature had done to make me compliant seemed to be starting to wear off, and I was realizing just how wrong everything was. I was also realizing that it didn't look like there was any easy escape from the house. All the windows I had seen were barred, and I recalled Sylvia MacDonald had locked the sturdy-looking front door behind it after we had all entered. So instead I just laid down on the musty old bed and I waited. Couldn't rightly say what I was waiting for, but soon enough it got dark, and I assumed Sylvia MacDonald had gone to sleep, not yet realizing the manner of being that I was dealing with. I wanted some light to comfort me, but the old house seemed to have no electricity at all, so I used my cigarette lighter on a candle I found next to the bed and crept towards the door. It wasn't locked, thankfully, and I left the room assigned to me and walked over to where I believed my brother was. I went in and found him lying in his own bed, pretending to sleep. After a bit of talk, it became clear that Nigel was no happier with our situation than I was, and we both resolved that another night on the cold streets was better than staying with this strange
Yeah, it sounds
woman.
like it.
As we talked through possible ways to escape, however, we heard a rustling sound outside the door, and the handle began to turn. Not wanting to anger our strange host, I crawled under the bed to hide, while Nigel returned to pretending to sleep. From my vantage point under the bed, I could see the door open and the skirt of Sylvia MacDonald enter and move towards the bed. I simply laid there and tried not to make a sound. I am not proud of this, and sometimes have a certainty that my inaction led directly to my brother's death, but most of the time I accept that if I had alerted the vampire to my presence, then I would
You'd be
also
dead
have
too.
died. Either way, the fact of the matter is that I did nothing, as I heard the sounds of a struggle overhead and Nigel's strangled cry.
Man, that would be rough. Imagine being in that scenario. Imagine being a 13-year-old kid in a strange house with a strange, even if it wasn't a vampire, just a strange house and a strange person. You have nothing, you have no one, and you essentially are under the bed and basically firsthand witness the murder of your older brother. And there's really nothing you can do about it. And if you tried to, you probably would be dead yourself. Like, jeez, that would be crazy. I couldn't even really imagine like dealing with that. Like, what that would do to someone. And I mean, again, like maybe she was a vampire, maybe she's just some kind of crazy killer. And this is his way of like rationalizing it and saying, "Oh, well, the reason why it happened is because she was a vampire, and you know, I killed her to avenge my brother, and then, you know, I went after other people like her and they were vampires, you know?" Just like trying to like psychologically rationalize away any of the supernatural element to it. Like that's what a psychiatrist would probably say. Like, you know, he made this, you know, up in his mind to rationalize what happened, but still, like, right. I mean, who wouldn't, right? You know, like, if you were to learn, like, let's say it's true, right? Like, he's a vampire, and you know, she killed and fed on his brother, and you end up, you know, killing her in return, and then you understand, like, these are actual real creatures and they do exist. What else would you have to do with your life at that point? You have nothing, you have no one, everything's taken you. The only person you ever cared about was killed by this thing. It would be pretty rational to, like, basically turn into a Batman figure hunting down vampires and trying to make sure this didn't happen to anyone else.
The creature turned quickly and hurled the rock away. The fact of the matter is that I did nothing, as I heard the sounds of a struggle overhead and Nigel's strangled cry. The creature turned quickly and hurled him down. Something fell to the floor in front of me, but I didn't look at it. My eyes locked on Sylvia MacDonald as it pounced on my brother. It opened its mouth for what I then realized was the first time since we met it, and I could see nothing inside save for a dozen long, thick, pointed teeth like a shark. In one fluid movement, it plunged those teeth into my brother's neck and tore out a great chunk of flesh. Blood started to spurt from Nigel's spasming body as Sylvia MacDonald's throat began to twitch. Its jaw detached, and a long, tubular tongue about the thickness of my forearm snaked out of its throat and clamped onto the gushing wound. There was an awful slurping sound, the first noise I'd ever really heard the creature make, as the tongue sucked the blood from my brother's throat. I just lay there watching as its stomach began to distend and swell, the now bulbous belly straining against the black dress it wore.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, this does sound more like some kind of animal creature, and the way it hunts, like he, again, as mentioned, is it's more of, it's somehow hypnotizing people and getting them to lower their guard, and then when he gets them alone, it just pounces on them. But yeah, that, I was gonna say that too. It's like, it's so fascinating how, like, they taken the concept of the vampire and kind of made it their own thing. You know, it looks human, but it actually is just some kind of predatory creature and probably uses that as a means of camouflage to blend in. It doesn't actually talk or open its mouth, but it, you know, through some kind of mind controls, psychic ability, hypnosis, or whatever, can make people think that it does. And, you know, through mental manipulation of some sort, get them to do what it wants them to do, get them alone, follow them, whatever. And then, yeah, you know, has teeth essentially that have evolved to rip the flesh from you, and then a tongue that has some kind of basically like organic straw to just absorb the blood and fluid from the body. Like, it's fascinating how they've, like, taken that concept and made it its own thing.
The now bulbous belly straining against the black dress it wore. After the longest 10 minutes of my life, the vampire finished. Its tongue retracted back into its throat, still dripping blood onto the now pale corpse of my brother, and it lay back upon the floor, apparently contented. As this had been happening, all my energy had gone towards not screaming or giving away my presence. But as the vampire lay satiated on the floor, I turned my attention to what had fallen from Nigel's hand when he had been dragged out of the bed. It was his pocket knife. I had no idea what a small knife like that would do against a creature that seemed far stronger and faster than me. But I didn't see any option other than to try. I moved so slowly as I reached for the knife that at times it seemed like I wasn't moving at all. I was worried that the creature would spot me and strike as it had with Nigel, although I now know that smell is in fact the vampire's major sense, and with all the blood around, there was little chance of it detecting my scent.
Interesting. So then it's almost, it's so fascinating how this is being told. Because like he's learned so much. He's essentially learned how to hunt vampire. Literally learned how to hunt vampires using blood to camouflage his own scent in their lair and things like that. Almost, it reminds me of the movie The Predator. You know, where Schwarzenegger falls and into the lake and then comes out covered in mud, and the predator can't detect him because it's masking his body heat. It's reminding me of that.
Grasping the knife in my hands, I crept over towards the creature as it placidly digested my brother's life, until I stood over it. I felt a sudden surge of rage and adrenaline come over me, and with a speed and strength I never knew I had, I plunged the knife into Sylvia MacDonald's blood-bloated stomach. It burst like a sick balloon,
Jesus.
and blood began to pour out. The creature's eyes shot open and it clutched at the wound desperately. Its throat was not capable of uttering a scream, but its face displayed a silent pain and anger as it flailed on the floor. Stumbling back, trying to wipe the blood from my eyes, I felt an unexpected burning in my hand. I realized I'd touched the still-lit candle on the bedside table. I don't know what I expected to happen when I grabbed the candle and pressed it to the dry part of Sylvia MacDonald's dress. I was just trying to find anything else I could do to harm it before it could recover from its split belly. But I certainly didn't expect it to catch like dry tinder.
Right.
The fire spread quickly over its repulsive form, though it did slow somewhat where the clothing or flesh was still moist with blood. It struck me that the vampire must be a very dry creature when not fresh-fed and engorged.
Interesting,
Perhaps
yeah.
I had struck before the liquid could spread throughout its body. Whatever the reason, Sylvia MacDonald was alight, and to such a degree that the rest of the room was starting to catch fire as well. I was distraught at the idea of leaving this house without my brother, but he was clearly dead, and I needed to escape. I recalled the vampire had been carrying a handbag when we first met it, and had used a key from it to lock the front door. It did not have the handbag with it now, though, so I began to desperately search the other rooms of the house, trying to find it. I did find it in the end, in what I assumed to be the vampire's bedroom. I'll not describe it in detail except to say that it appears to be where the creature took most of its meals. Hopefully that makes the picture clear enough for you. I found the key, though, and escaped that house before the fire did me any serious damage. I was terrified of the police coming and thinking I was a murderer, so I didn't stick around. I just fled into the night.
Yeah, smart.
It was almost a decade before I encountered another vampire. I'd been living on the streets all that time, occasionally in and out of various institutions, and had just about managed to convince myself that Sylvia MacDonald had just been a bad reaction to the stress of watching my brother's murder. It was in the late 60s that I learned different. It was 1968, I remember, because that was the year United won the European Cup, and I did quite well out of it, people being generous to begging when they're happy over a sports win. On a Friday night, I would generally spend my time around the Oasis Club in Lloyd Street, and hit up for change anyone who was slightly the worse for drink. Well, this night in particular I was doing quite well, as it was a warm June evening not too long after the cup final, and everyone was in a good mood. Now, about 11:30 that night, I spied a stranger all turned out for dancing, making his way from the club with a lady friend. I reckoned they might be good for a tanner, so I made my approach. I gave them the spiel and waited. The man looked at me, and I understood he wouldn't be giving me any money, and I stepped away. It was as he turned to leave, I realized that he hadn't opened his mouth, and memories of Sylvia MacDonald came rushing back to me in a flash. I wasn't sure what to do, so I followed behind them at a distance. I didn't try to hide or disguise myself, as I had long since learned, and it's true now as it was back then, that no one pays any real attention to a tramp. As I
Hunter
watched,
becomes the
I
hunted.
saw the clearly drunken woman asking this stranger questions, and each time he'd just look at her, and she'd smile as though he'd given some reassuring answer, and stumble on behind him. All the while he never once opened his mouth. I didn't rightly know what to do about this. I had no weapon save my brother's old pocket knife, which I had kept sharp all these years, and while I was pretty sure of what I was seeing, I was still hesitant to attack with no provocation and no plan. As we walked, I kept an eye out for any discarded wood or timber, and sure enough noticed a broken wooden pallet partially sticking out of a bin. I grabbed a long shard and used my knife to quickly hack it to a point, ignoring the splinters. While I had not at that time done much research into the creatures I faced, believing as I did my experience as a youth to be the product of a disturbed mental state, I was still aware of their supposed weakness to wooden stakes.
It's interesting, just to pause it right here, how also he basically rationalized it the same way that I was talking about earlier, how he thought it was all just a disturbing thing, that maybe that really wasn't, like, everything that happened to him really didn't happen the way that it did, and she was just a crazy woman that killed his brother, and he defended himself and then got out of there, you know. But now, you know, he's seeing another one and is basically, you know, coming to the realization of, no, these things apparently are real, and what happened is real, and this probably is going to be like the pivotal moment where he's like, I'm, you know, going to dedicate himself to like finding these things.
I had now followed the vampire, who I would later find out called itself Robert Arden, and its victim back to the building where it apparently lived. It let itself in the front door and the woman followed. I wasn't fast enough to get in before the front door closed and obviously didn't have a key, so I went round the windows and, luckily, it seemed the vampire lived on the ground floor. I watched through the window as it led its victim into a sparsely furnished living room. I couldn't see any obvious signs of previous slaughter, but I remembered how cleanly Sylvia MacDonald had sucked up all the blood from my brother, so this did not strike me as odd. I gently tried the window and found it locked, so searched the garden for the heaviest stone I could find and watched what was happening inside. I had to be sure. Soon enough, Robert Arden moved smoothly behind its now seated prey, and finally opened its mouth to reveal those rows of shark-like teeth I knew would be there. I hurled the rock I held through the window, showering the room with broken glass and causing the woman to scream in shock. Robert Arden raised its head in surprise, and for one moment our eyes locked, and I knew I had made a terrible mistake. The woman looked at her monstrous companion and, seeing his now open mouth, screamed her terror even louder. In a single movement, far quicker than I expected, Robert Arden was through the window and on me. I struggled and fought, but it was far stronger than I was, and I could barely keep its jagged teeth from finding my throat. It was the first and last time I ever touched a vampire's skin with my own. The flesh was cold and spongy, like the inside of a bruised apple, and I felt bile rise in my throat even as I fought for my life. Finally, its teeth bit into my neck. Not enough to kill me outright, but with enough force to cause the blood to flow. At that moment, I saw a sort of frenzy enter the eyes of Robert Arden, and with a spasm, its leech's tongue surged from its throat, and I felt it attach to my neck.
Jesus.
I do not know if you've ever felt your blood being sucked out of you, but I would not recommend it.
Yeah, I wouldn't either.
At this point, I have something of a confession to make. For the 3 years preceding this event, as well as on and off throughout the years since, I have had a relationship with the drug heroin. I tried it for the first time shortly after Nigel's death, and since then I have periodically relapsed. I have always tried to keep this a secret, as I am aware that I have a certain reputation to uphold, and I would not want it to be damaged with the revealing of my addiction. But it is important to this account, as I believe it was whatever heroin still remained in my system that night that caused the vampire Robert Arden to remove its tongue from my neck and start to shake as though having a violent choking fit.
Interesting. So drugs could have an adverse effect to it, right? Maybe it taints the blood, or it causes them to have, you know, the feeling of whatever the drug could be, you know. And I mean, like, if you've never done a serious heavy drug before, then, you know, that all of a sudden being rushed into your system, especially you would think as a vampire, right, where they need blood to survive, so all of a sudden getting a rush of fresh blood into their system that is also tainted with some kind of drugs, that would probably hit them very hard and quickly and disorient them. So that's also super interesting, that getting high off stuff could be a defense mechanism against vampires.
I lay there, trying to compose myself enough to fight back, and I became aware of the screaming. The woman, who had been brought in as a victim, was standing over the flailing Robert Arden, stabbing it repeatedly with a kitchen knife.
Jesus.
Strong and quick as it was, the vampire didn't seem to be able to cope with the sudden onslaught of violence and was on the ground. This gave me the precious seconds I needed to get to my feet and locate my improvised wooden stake. I took aim and plunged it into where I believed the thing's heart should be. It was...
I mean, if she's still alive, she could at least corroborate this event, right? You know?
easier than I thought it would be. The chest was soft and yielding, and there didn't seem to be any rib cage to stop the blow. Robert Arden went rigid and froze, apparently unable to move its body, though I saw its eyes darting around wildly. It was at that point the woman, whose name I never discovered, dropped the knife and ran. I never saw her again, but she had already saved my life. I took out my cigarette lighter and set Robert Arden alight. Like Sylvia MacDonald before it, it caught fire in a matter of seconds, and by the time the police arrived, there was nothing left but a small patch of scorched tarmac.
So it almost seems like their heart is like the central nervous system in their body. And if you puncture their heart, they're paralyzed and can't function anymore. And then you just need to burn them. It's so fascinating how they're taking like all of the kind of vampire mythos and like rewriting it in this tale. It's very interesting.
I was lucky that night, and nobody saw anything or called the police before I was finished and had made my way from the scene. But I was always more careful after that. Following that night, though, I was never again worried that I might have been wrong about the existence of vampires.
Yeah.
I always kept my eyes open for them, although sometimes I was too eager, as was the case of Allard Dupont, who I killed in 1982 and later discovered was a human. It is my belief that they are very rare and feed only infrequently, as all evidence I have seen points to their feeding being fatal.
It's crazy, though, that he's seen multiple... Well, I mean, if they're extremely rare, you know, him having 2 encounters randomly is interesting. But I would have guessed then after the second encounter, which would, you know, reaffirm and solidify what actually happened to him as a kid was real, that he would then probably be researching and potentially seeking them out. So he would have reason to actually find more.
If there were many vampires, or if they ate often, the number of disappearances would quickly become noticeable to the rest of society. I do not know what they do with the bodies of their victims, and this is always
something like that,
as they do not have any mechanism for eating solid food, and I do not believe there are many, if any, cases of murder where the body is found completely without blood. I certainly do not think they rise as vampires themselves, as the vampire population seems far too small for this to be a possibility. Statement ends.
Interesting.
According to Martin, who was here when they took this statement, it was at this point in writing that Mr. Herbert announced he needed some sleep before continuing. He was shown to the break room, where he went to sleep on the couch. He did not awaken, unfortunately succumbing to the lung cancer right there. Martin says the staff had been aware of how serious Mr. Herbert's condition was and had advised him to seek medical aid prior to giving his statement, but were told rather bluntly by the old man that he would not wait another second to state his case. I can't decide whether this lends more or less credibility to his tale. Regardless, there is substantial evidence to support the version of events told by Mr. Herbert in all aspects except the vampirism. There is a news report of a 1959 fire that consumed a house on Loom Street and apparently claimed the life of an 18-year-old boy, although no mention is made of the homeowner. And a police report from 1968 confirms the disappearance of Robert Arden in Manchester amid circumstances of violence, including a broken window and signs of a fire, though no human remains were found. There is also a murder report concerning one Allard Dupont, whose partially burned corpse was found in his home on August 2nd, 1982. Unfortunately, Mr. Herbert was never able to give details of others, so we cannot corroborate further. There was, however, a small bag left on top of this statement, which appears to contain 6 shark teeth of varying sizes. According to correspondence with the zoology department at King's College, they didn't match any currently known species. Personally, I don't know what to think. I certainly don't believe in wild tales of vampirism, but I can't help but notice that the statement above appears to be a photocopy of a photocopy, and can't find these supposed vampire teeth anywhere in the archives or the secure containment room.
Interesting.
I don't know where the originals are, but the file number is listed among multiple information requests from the Institute's government and law enforcement contracts. It may be that they take Mr. Herbert's statement far more seriously than I do. End recording.
Good episode.
The Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by rustyquill.com and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike International License. Today's episode was written and performed by Jonathan Sims. It was produced by Alexander J. Newell, Mike LeBeau, and Murray Porter, and directed by Alexander J. Newell. To comment on episodes, make donations, and view links, images, videos, and show notes, visit rustyquill.com. Rate and review us on iTunes, visit us on Facebook, tweet us on Twitter @TheRustyQuill, or email us at mail@rustyquill.com. Thanks for listening.
All right, well, there we go. That was the Magnus Archives, Episode 10, Vampire Killer. Links, as always, will be down below in the description to the Magnus Archives playlist, your Rusty Quill Podcast YouTube channel, and to their website. So if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to go over there and give this one a like. Check out, their YouTube channel, and check out their website. If they got any sponsorship stuff going on, check out their Patreon. If you want to give them some support and give them some love. Good episode. This one was another one that was definitely much more straightforward, and I really just like how they took kind of the vampire mythos and really kind of rewrote it as their own thing. Instead of it being, humans turn, etc., it's essentially just some kind of potentially natural predator of humans, maybe. And, who knows where they come from, how they reproduce, etc. He didn't seem to really get into that or know about that. But, they just happen to look like humans as a mean of blending in or camouflage, or if it's some kind of psychic or mental ability that they have, they could project what they want people to see them as, maybe, as a means of defense or camouflage itself. They seem to have some kind of abilities to manipulate people in some kind of way, whether through hypnosis or some kind of psychic connection, where they can, just get people to do whatever they want, manipulate them without them really knowing. Interestingly enough, they never really talk. And so I wonder, the story he told about the woman killing him and his brother, right? It seemed like maybe there was a situation where he was under the hypnosis, and maybe for some reason, after a certain amount of time, your body gets used to it and wears off, because he'd mentioned, at some point he kind of came to the realization that he and his brother are in danger and they need to leave, and that, her connection wasn't doing anything to him anymore. And that could also essentially just be a situation where, the vampire hadn't eaten enough and was weak, and so, was able to overcome it. You'd think if that was the case, the vampire would realize that, though, but just how, it has shark teeth to basically just puncture and rip open the flesh to, get at the arteries, and has this tongue appendage to just suck the whole blood out of the body, and the fact that they're vulnerable to fire because essentially they just have no fluid or liquid or anything in them, so they just burn real easily. Potentially, it sounds like, their heart could be the center of their nervous system, and when you puncture that, they become paralyzed and vulnerable and can't fight back anymore. Just very fascinating how they took the vampire mythos and kind of rewrote it and made it their own thing. I would be eager to know, more about them and if there are any other kind of vampire accounts in the future and future episodes. But I also just like how this episode is really kind of like, I guess, almost like his last will and testament, basically going to them, knowing that he's going to die soon, and just kind of trying to tell them about these creatures, and almost like it's seemingly his life's work to learn about them and maybe hunt them down to an extent, and to, I guess, maybe sort of in a way pass the baton on to them and say, hey, these things exist, prepare for them, or at least understand what to do in a scenario if you find yourself amongst one of them, and yeah, I think at the beginning of the episode, he said he killed like 5 of them over a certain period of time. With one of them, he mistook as a vampire, but it ended up being a human, although that person was a serial killer, so don't feel bad. So essentially, it sounds like from his tale, 2 of them he came upon, accidentally through circumstances, the old woman and then the guy trying to take the woman home who was drunk from the bar. And then after that second, encounter and coming to the realization that what happened to him was really a vampire, it probably after that, he might have done some research and learned a little bit more, and may have actually tried to seek them out in some ways, and ended up killing them. But it's also just fascinating how, like, through happenstance, he just kind of learned how to defend himself and almost hunt them down. That, in their lair, when it's engorged with blood, you can use blood to mask your own scent. They only really seem to hunt by scent. They don't necessarily pick up vision quite as much. So, finding ways to camouflage yourself against them so you can hunt them down. I don't know. It was all just very interesting. It was very interesting. Great episode. These first episodes really show the range of different kinds of stories. Yeah, for sure. So another banger from the Magnus Archives. Another great episode. Really enjoyed this one. Like I said, each one keeps getting better and better and more interesting. And this one again was a little bit more straightforward, but it's also kind of an interesting, just in general, twist on like the vampire hunter tale, where this is just an ordinary guy and these things just happened to him, right? He had a pretty terrible life. His father was abusive and murdered his own mother, murdered his mom, and then ended up dying himself through, alcohol abuse. They were put out on the street. He essentially, witnessed the murder of his brother, being there and helpless to do anything about it, then avenged it. His mind rationalized it as not necessarily seeing the way it was, only to find out that it was at some point in time from another vampire attack. And yeah, I don't know. Just a very kind of fascinating way that they twisted and turned the kind of vampire, like the John Constantine or Blade-esque kind of vampire hunter mythos, and turned it into just a regular guy that these things just happen to. And he's just telling his tale before he dies. And unfortunately, he died before he could finish it. Almost again like he's passing the baton off to them to at least say, hey, be aware of these things. If not, hunt them down. So great episode. Like I said, links will be down below to all their stuff. Go check them out, give them some support. If you would like to take your support from my channel to the next level, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description, the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer, so you can check all that and see if it would have any interest for you. I have a playlist on my channel of previous Magnus Archive episodes that I've reacted to, so if you want to check out other Magnus Archive episodes, there's a playlist there for you to do so. Thank you guys very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Greatly appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to do so, and if you're still watching here to the very end, it means a lot. I greatly appreciate your support. consider leaving a like and a sub for the channel if you did enjoy this video of mine. And yeah, hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day. See you on the next one.